Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Dark Pixel Podcast. My name is Mike. Today I'm on my own. Jason is out of town. And so I've decided that what I'm going to do is actually take a ton of topics today, right? Because generally we try to take about 6 topics per podcast, give or take 1 or 2. And, between 2 people talking about that, used to be 3 people, we'd end up at about an hour and a half or whatever. Today, I'm going to try taking on like 12 topics by myself and see if it comes out to about the same. We will find out if that's how things work or not. Hello, everyone who is joining me live. Glad you guys could be here. I want to start off by talking a little bit about the teaser announcement for Bravely Default. I don't know if you guys have seen this. I'll pull up an image for you to look at. Just a second. Let me switch this. And if we go down to... make sure I pull it up. Right over there. So here, there was a tweet from the guys over at the Bravely Default studio. They were responding to the million sales figure that was announced for Octopath Traveler, right? So Octopath Traveler surpasses 1 million downloads. Well, not downloads, sales. 100 sales. 100 Oh, my brain is freaking destroyed today. Frick. Let's try that again. Octopath Traveler has surpassed 1 million sales worldwide. Okay, huge achievement. They were not expecting that kind of success. So the Bravely Default team here, in Japanese, which I cannot read, is essentially congratulating them for that, but they also tweeted this teaser image. Of course, this fairy figure here on the wall is the fairy from Bravely Default. So there is some speculation that this is a teaser image for an upcoming game in the Bravely Default series. Overall, the success of Octopath Traveler is really good news for games like Bravely Default. I think that Square is we're probably going to see more of a push toward games done in that kind of old school JRPG style. Maybe they'll get larger budgets put into them, a little more time and attention. Hopefully that will be the result of the success of Octopath Traveler. And, let's see Tokyo RPG Studio step it up a little bit too. I mean, because I think they have a lot of potential there as well. But this is good news. This is really good news for these kinds of games if you're into them. On top of this, I think that they also have announced their art book. There's a big, Bravely Default art book that's coming out. If you guys are into that, it's 256 pages. It's a substantial art book, so, keep an eye on that as well. I was thinking, maybe they were teasing that here, but, from what I'm reading, I think this is more along the lines of we have a Bravely Default game. So that is very exciting if it's true. I really like Bravely Default. I didn't play Bravely Second, but I really like the first one a lot. I would say that, just speaking from where I'm at in Octopath Traveler right now, which is I've beaten the 2nd chapter bosses for Therion and for Primrose. That's as far into Chapter 2 as I've gotten. I still got the other 6 characters, Chapter 2 bosses to fight. But from what I've played of Octopath Traveler versus Bravely Default, I actually prefer Bravely Default as a game more. But they have their similarities. So another Bravely Default game is great. I didn't bother playing Bravely Second because I heard the story was pretty bad. So that is the one thing. That these studios who are making these really stellar quality games, the one thing that I still feel they really need to do better is compelling storytelling. I think they're still missing that. That is the one element of these like modern day old school JRPGs that is missing from what made the old school JRPGs like truly special. So if any of these people can get that figured out and we can get a game with an amazingly well-told story in addition to these really interesting gameplay systems and battle systems they're putting together, I think we'll have some really good stuff on our hands. So let's hope for that. Let's hope for that. Derek McGowan is saying, get Yasume Matsuno. I get a Yasume Matsuno vibe from Octopath that is so endearing. I think if they could get him, if they could just hire Yasumi Matsuno, or Masato Kato, a number of guys who used to work at Square, if they could get someone like that to come and do the story, then we'd have a really, 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 really awesome thing on our hands. But that being said, it's good to see that there's still a market for this kind of game. It's good to see that like we're proving to Square, with our wallets, that these are the kinds of games we still want to receive. And Final Fantasy's been getting further and further away from that. It's like, no, we loved what you guys used to make. Make more of that. So if they have, 2 or 3 studios there internally, or at least that they're partnered with, that are making this kind of thing, and we can get them made at the quality of Octopath Traveler and Bravely Default, and if they can improve the story, I think we're all in really good hands. Okay, so that was that. Just wanted to mention that really quickly in case you guys had not heard about it. Could have another Bravely Default game coming here the next year, maybe 2. Okay, so I tried to field as many of the suggested topics as I could today. That's why there's so many. But the first one comes from Tyler White. And I liked this question. It hit a little close to home for me. Have you fallen out of love with actually playing games as you've grown old? It's from Tyler White. Ooh, he has more context to this. Actually, let me just read the full context. I've got that open as well. He wrote, wait a minute, what the? One second, gotta click through to the right page. Load all the comments. And then Tyler White, okay. He says, have you fallen out of love with actually playing games you've gotten older? Is there another way that you prefer to experience games now? For example, I now very rarely play games, at least those with story, because I don't have the spare time to play them fully. However, I still enjoy experiencing these games, but rather in watching someone else play them whilst I get on with other tasks in the background and listening to reviews / the storyline of. I think for all of us that grew up in the late 80s and during the 90s, and we played these classic JRPGs, we're all kind of getting to that age now where we work a lot. A lot of us have families and have a lot of time that we have to dedicate to family life. And it can be really, really hard to find the time to put into a long JRPG. I was watching another channel today, actually. Hold on, I'll pull it up real quick. It's a good channel. I really liked the video, too. He does a series of videos called So I've Been Playing. It's kind of like, So I've Been Playing This. This one was So I've Been Playing Lost Odyssey. Thor High Heels is the name of the channel. THOR and then High Heels. Thor High Heels. So he did a video on Golden Sun. That's the one I was watching. And he was talking about how one of the features about JRPGs that used to appeal to him a lot was their length, was the fact that they're so long. And you feel like you get so much out of it because there's just so much content in there. But as we've gotten older, as he's gotten older, he feels like that's the part about it that makes it harder for him to really get into JRPGs, you know, not having that much time to put into something. Um, and that's exactly how I feel. I am so swamped with work between, you know, full-time job and then like all the time that goes into video creation for this channel, you know, trying to have a life outside of that, relationships, you know, keep up with my family, um, you know, any other hobbies that I have outside of gaming, you know, like I love to write music. I really enjoy exercise and playing sports. There's a lot of things that I really like, and so it's like so many things are, you know, fighting for priority in my life. You know, I'm trying to write a novel at the same time. There's just like so much going on that it really does appeal to me when I hear of a game and it's like, oh, you could beat that game in like 15 to 20 hours. Are you serious? Yes. yes. Yes, I love shorter games. Um and that is a leading cause as to why to some degree I really have fallen out of love of the act of playing a game. Sometimes it is nice to just like get an idea of what it's like, watch an LP, watch somebody else, you know, get their thoughts on it and discuss it. That's really what I enjoy about games more than anything else now is the discussion and like the analysis and trying to like see how what the thought process was of the creators, like the behind the scenes creation and creative aspect of games is really what I'm more interested in today than I am in actually like the entertainment value of playing through a game. So there will be times when it's like late at night and I have like half an hour before bed, maybe an hour before bed, and it's like I could either do some writing, maybe watch something for a while I eat dinner, you know, my last meal, or I could play a game. And usually playing the game is the thing that goes first. Like, nah, I'm tired. I don't want to bother with it. I just want to relax. Um, so yeah, I mean, like as I've gotten older, it has become less and less fun for me to play games and more like interesting to like analyze them or think about how they're made. So that's not to say I don't enjoy playing games. Of course I do. Games are great, and there are certainly a number of games in recent years that have just like I couldn't put them down. Like Hellblade last year was one of those where it's just like I can't stop. Like I just had to keep going, and nothing was going to get in the way of me finishing that game. So there are certainly still examples where I kind of get really invested in playing a game, but that being said, it's like it's nowhere near the level of interest in terms again of just the actual playing of the game that I had when I was younger. So yeah, I would say that as I've gotten older, I've slowly fallen out of love with actually playing games, and I've fallen more in love with talking about them and discussing them and analyzing them. So yeah, I would say I'm with you there on that, Tyler. So thank you for the question. Mike, why haven't you beaten the Alliance Alive yet, or have you? It's a shorter RPG. For the reason I just told you, I don't have time. I'm trying to juggle right now between putting time into Octopath Traveler and the Alliance Alive. I finally finished Radiant Historia Perfect Chronology about 3 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, something like that. And as soon as that came out of the 3DS, Alliance Alive went into the 3DS. So that and Octopath Traveler are kind of my two games I'm playing right now. But Octopath is getting more attention than the Alliance Alive. So, anyways, that is that. Moving on to the next question. This one comes from Joshua OG. While watching one of your deep dives, I think it was for FF13, I was struck by a comment you made about variety of play and how FF13 could do with something to break up the combat, because as good as the combat is, it does get repetitive. I realize that a lot of the reason I play games is for novelty, whether that is in gameplay, in story, in setting, or somewhere else. What other games do you think could have done with some extra variety of play to break up the monotony that would set in? So this is in reference to my, you were correct, my FF13 review. And I was talking about how I was trying to kind of break down the common criticism people throw at Final Fantasy 13, which is it's so linear, it's too linear. I don't actually think there's anything wrong with the game being linear at all. Because some of my favorite games of all time, one of them being Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, is just an insanely linear game. I mean, the whole game is running through castle hallways. It's hallways of castle hallways. But the game never feels like, oh, this is linear in the sense that I think the negative connotation people look at. And that's for a couple reasons. One, it has so many different ways of interacting with it. You don't just run forward through the hallways and fight enemies and then keep running forward through the hallways. There's parkour platforming. There's really good puzzle solving in the game. There's combat, and there's a pretty engaging story there. So, like, the fact that there's more than just running forward and fighting to do is what helps break up monotony in the game. The other element that helps it is its pacing. You're not doing just one activity for an excessive amount of time. You're not just doing combat for like 2 hours straight, and then you move to puzzle solving for 2 hours straight. They do a really good job of giving you just the right amount of combat to feel satisfied, and then you're ready to move on to a different thing. And now you move on to a puzzle. Now you move on to a platforming section in a way that's just like, oh, that was awesome. Oh, that was awesome. Oh, that was awesome. Then they cycle back around again. Oh, that was awesome. So it's a matter of variety and a matter of pacing, right? So Final Fantasy 13 has, I think, like 2 or 3 parts in the game where they try to like throw a little mini game-ish thing at you, but they last a matter of minutes in some cases. Like, it's just like not enough to really make you feel like you've had any kind of diversion or break in the flow of gameplay. So like 95% of the game is run forward, doop, 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 fight this guy, run forward, doop, 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 fight this guy, run forward, fight this guy, run forward, fight this guy. Okay, watch a cutscene. Okay, run forward, fight this guy, run forward. That's it. That's it. And the dungeons are so massively long, just like really, really, really long. They overstay their welcome. And so that's what makes it feel repetitive and monotonous. So what are some other games that I know of that I think could use more variety? It's hard to say. It's hard to pull something out of my head where it's like, oh man, this was just really boring. This is not an example that is equivalent to Final Fantasy 13, but what did come to my head early on for a game that felt very repetitive to me was Assassin's Creed. So the Assassin's Creed games I've played are 1, 2, Brotherhood, Revelations, 4, and 3 and 4. So the one that I'm thinking of in particular is Assassin's Creed 1, but there was a little bit of this in the others as well. And they tried to have a large variety of things to do. They tried to have like different types of like missions. Here you're going to go like eavesdrop on this conversation. Here you're going to pickpocket somebody and glean some information from that. Here you're going to I can't even remember what. Anyways, they had like 3 or 4 different types of like info gathering missions in the first Assassin's Creed game. So they gave an attempt to essentially like have a variety of things to do, like little mini games, I guess you could call them. But they were so shallow, and they were all exactly the same. You go sit on this bench and eavesdrop. You go climb this tower and unlock the new area's map. And it was like there wasn't any like depth to them, even though they tried to have a number of things you could do. It's like each time you did that thing, each pickpocketing mission was essentially exactly the same. Each tailing mission is basically exactly the same. Each eavesdropping mission is exactly the freaking same. Versus something like Final Fantasy VII, where they have like a variety of very different mini games. Like snowboarding is not anything like the submarine mini game, which is nothing like the motorbike mini game, which is nothing like the oh shoot, what's it called? Where you do the little tactical battles on the hillside. Fort Condor. Fort Condor. You know, each and every one of those, it's like you came across a new minigame and it was completely unlike anything you had done before. So it was like, again, I'm not advocating the quality of the minigames in Final Fantasy VII. Most of them were pretty frustrating. I don't think they're very good. But the point is, they were trying to do something to like really like break things up, try something totally different, totally new, and give you a little bit of a break from just fighting random battles over and over and over and over again. So while I think Assassin's Creed tried that, it really failed to make those diversions interesting really in any way. And while it got better as it moved forward in the series, I think that the series as a whole has always kind of struggled with that. Its side missions become very repetitive. You're doing the same exact thing, and it's like not even like the context in which you're doing it, whether you're following this person or whether you're climbing that building or whether you're pickpocketing a different guy or whatever it is. It's like the tactics, you go through the motions and you do exactly the same things, and it starts to feel like, oh, all I have to do is this in every single one of these for the rest of the game. That's boring now, right? So anyways, I'm trying to think of any other examples that I know of where a game really, really needed to have more variety, because that's kind of like what open world games today have become. They've become essentially the like Assassin's Creed kind of formula, where they have they have like 4 or 5 mission types, and it's like they'll have like 10 missions in each one, where it's like you'll have 10 of this kind of mission, 10 of this kind of mission, 10 of this kind of mission, 10 of this, and 10 of this. And you sort of like go find what type of mission it is, and then you know what to expect from it. And that can start to feel very formulaic and very boring as you play through something. It starts to feel shallow over time. Because it's kind of like, okay, we've created a formula for the types of missions we have. Now we're just going to like basically plug in different NPCs, put it in a different location, and so on. So a lot of modern open world games really, I think, struggle from that. But in terms of a game just being kind of like Final Fantasy 13 was, where there's really only one way to interact with it, nothing's really coming to mind specifically. So I wish I could answer that question better for you, Joshua, but that's all I've got. Okay. Let's move on to Christopher Guin, who is also here at the moment. How important is groundedness for you in video games, whether talking about grounded in relatable characters or grounded in believable worlds? Have there ever been games that were either too bizarre or fanciful or too mundane or ordinary for you to really get into? So for me, I think there's kind of 2 ways to look at this. One is groundedness, and I think the way that you're insinuating, which is the realism or believability of something. There's also groundedness in the sense that you feel like you understand like how the world operates. What are the rules of this universe or world that you are currently exploring? Feeling like you are grounded in that world and that you get a sense for how it should work. So I kind of want to talk about both. in regards to the first meaning of groundedness, believability is really all I care about. And I think that you can have believability in something that is extremely fantastical or out there or could even blatantly be unrealistic. I think that you can still find believability in a world like that, as long as you have groundedness, the second meaning, as long as you have established what the rules of that world are, and as long as you follow the rules that you set. So you could have, I don't know, like the wackiest world ever where, I don't even know if I can think of it. Like Jade Cocoon, not Jade Cocoon. Shoot, Beyond Good and Evil, right? Like I watched the trailer for the new one, and it's like that world's freaking nuts. There's like talking animals. It looked like people were maybe breathing in space. Like space itself doesn't look to be the same as space in our world. Like things are really, really nuts and crazy, and like that's not realistic in any way. So you could say it's not grounded in reality. However, as long as the rules of that universe are established in the storytelling and they're consistent and everything in the story stays consistently within those bounds that are set, then it will feel believable. And it can still work, and you can still get invested, and you're not going to sit there being, like questioning every little thing. And so I don't really have any preference for a game being super bizarre and fanciful or being too ordinary or whatever. Or maybe not ordinary is the right word, but maybe too realistic, I should say. Great stories can be told in both ways, and of course, this is a spectrum. It's not a one or the other. It can lie anywhere in between. So you can believably tell a story in whatever setting you want and be as crazy with it as you want, as long as the rules are understood and the player is grounded by those rules. The player feels like, okay, I know how this operates. I get the rules, so I can follow it. I can believe in it. So that would be my answer to that. Establish the rules, follow the rules. The player should be able to get grounded by them and should enjoy it. So let's move on to Matthew Alder. Matthew Alder asks, if you had to make a feature-length documentary on one specific RPG, which one would you choose and why? For example, would you choose a game which had a particularly tumultuous development, or maybe a game with many unanswered questions and fan theories? That's a really good question because, yeah, I mean, it would be really interesting to go into a game that, like, there's a lot of speculation about in the community. Like, a lot of people debate, like, what the story is, whether it's this or whether it's that, like maybe the Squall's dead theory, fans love to talk about that. There are a lot of games where there are unanswered questions that the developer never really answered, and that people have been debating what the answer is for many, many years. And it'd be super cool to do like a documentary that sort of puts those to rest, where you like actually interview the developers, and if you can get them to actually give the answers to that, it'd be like, oh, this documentary like finally gives those answers. Like that could be a very interesting project. At the same time, in my own retrospectives, I tend to really focus on the hurdles that the development team had to overcome to create something really great. I just find that there's something really satisfying in learning from the experience of people who have gone through really, really, really difficult times, difficult problems that they had to solve in order to make something that really resonates with people. They really put their all into it. They put their heart and soul into something, and they overworked, and they really stretched themselves, and they did everything they could to make it amazing. And then you learn about what that person went through, and it makes you appreciate the work even more, I've found. And I seem to really like that approach, to really get the story behind the people who made it. So that's probably the direction I would go. I would probably pick a game like Xenogears, something where like they really struggled and maybe they didn't get to complete it in the way that they wanted to, but you could just see the raw passion behind the creation of that game, and sort of like share that with people who loved it, so that their appreciation can be deepened as well for this game that the story moved them. It made them think. It made them consider things they hadn't considered before. When you take experiences that had that kind of effect on people, and then you can give them an even deeper understanding of that work, that's really at the heart of like what I want to do here on YouTube. That's what I want to do with my videos. And so I would probably pick a game like Xenogears, possibly Chrono Trigger. Although Chrono Trigger didn't. I mean, Chrono Trigger, there were some guys that went through some tough things. But yeah, like maybe Final Fantasy VII or the original Final Fantasy 1. But yeah, I would probably pick a game that I knew had a tumultuous or a difficult development cycle or history, and then focus on the stories of those developers, those creators, and kind of tell how much they had to go through to bring this thing to us that we all love, and help the audience deepen their appreciation of the work. That's probably what I would do. Okay. Thank you for the question, Matthew Alder. Here comes one from Juan Soto. And this touches a little bit on something I was talking about earlier with the Bravely Default teaser announcement. Juan asks, should new JRPGs stop comparing themselves to older classics? I believe there was more to this. Let me read the whole thing. Because of this, Octopath during its development was called by its producer a successor to the SNES JRPGs. Because of this, some were disappointed by the lack of focus on a central narrative, like me, and character interaction, attributes people associate with classic FFs. However, Octopath does a fine job in what it sets out to do, a good battle system with exploration, customization, and freedom for the player. Had it not been compared or likened to Final Fantasy, less people would have been disappointed, yet over 1 million copies were sold, partly due to the classic look and feel of the game. Should new JRPGs stop tying themselves down to comparisons with older games and stand on their own? Personally, I think it's fine if a game looks and plays like Octopath, but it should not be marketed in comparison to older games because that messes with the audience's expectations. Yeah, I think for the most part that is I agree with you. I think that it's very dangerous to point to beloved classics in the industry and say, the game I'm making, it's basically like that. Because people do get inflated expectations when you do that. And like in the short term, sure, you're going to sell more copies because people are looking, they're hungry for an experience like that, especially with JRPGs, which kind of were in a bit of a rut during like the PlayStation 3-ish era, right? And people were looking back on the games that they loved in their childhood and going like, wow, I want one like that. So when you come out and say, like Tokyo RPG Factory did with I Am Setsuna, this is basically like Chrono Trigger. This is a successor to that style of game. It's like, oh, another Chrono Trigger? Yeah. I know that the director of Octopath Traveler said something similar about Final Fantasy VI. This is in the vein of Final Fantasy VI. And people are like, oh, Final Fantasy VI. And yeah, like people are gonna rush at first to like try and find something that reminds them of the experience they had with Final Fantasy VI that's comparable to, and then they'll find out, oh, this isn't really that. Especially with the lack of attention to storytelling that I Am Setsuna, Lost Sphere, Bravely Default, and Octopath Traveler have had. Like, we could debate about the quality of the gameplay on I Am Setsuna and Lost Sphere, which I think were probably a little, below par, maybe just at par. But Octopath Traveler and Bravely Default, I think on the gameplay side of things, are both really, really excellent games. I think they're fantastic. I love the art style in both of them as well. Like I loved using 3D on the 3DS for Bravely Default. Like just the depth of those paintings, those images was just unbelievable. It was beautiful. And so they have the aesthetic, they have the play style, the philosophy of development, great battle systems, customization, all kinds of great stuff in there that harkens back to that time. What they are missing are really well told stories. And I think that is just like the single hurdle keeping these games from achieving that kind of status and that sense of being beloved in the same ways as those older games. So it is dangerous to try to compare yourself to the other games, but at the same time, it really does help with sales. But if you don't deliver on the promise, if you say, I'm going to give you an experience like FF6, and you don't have a story that's anywhere near as good as FF6, a bunch of people are going to jump on the bandwagon at first, and then your next game, you've built a fan base of people who are eager for more of what you've done, but then you've got to deliver on that the next time. I think that's what went wrong with Tokyo RPG Factory. It was like their first game, it was like, it just wasn't quite there. And then they released Lost Sphere, and in a lot of ways it was worse than I Am Setsuna. So you have to eventually start delivering if you're going to make promises of that kind. Otherwise, people will start losing faith in you. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to make promises like that, as long as you're going to deliver on all those aspects. And that's a risk that's a big risk. Now, with Octopath Traveler, I believe that the gameplay, the visual style, the music, all of that has made up for any failings in the story for the majority of people who are playing that game. And so I think that despite the fact that Octopath's storytelling is not like the greatest I've ever seen, and certainly not the greatest for among JRPGs, like, it is a refreshing enough experience for people that they're fully enjoying it without any regrets. I don't think that was the case with, like, I Am Setsuna. So I Am Setsuna had a lot more of an uphill battle with its second game than the Octopath team will have with their next game. But yeah, it's harder to make that initial jump in sales and get to that million, figure that Octopath Traveler did without saying things like that, without saying, this is basically like those great SNES RPGs that you loved. Like, that gets people interested. Ooh, I'm going to follow this now. They had obviously a huge surge in sales because they made comparisons like that. Whether or not they will retain that over the years remains to be seen. I think Octopath has a good chance of doing that because the battle system, the exploration, the visual style, the music, all of that was so good that I think they captured a lot of people. So if they can improve on storytelling from there, like, oh man, it's only going to be solidifying that promise, right? So anyways, that is my answer to that. Juan, thank you for asking. Let's move on to Xylon73. How do you guys feel about Romhacks? I've played a number of Fire Emblem and Pokemon ones and had a great time with experiences that shake up the original game. Do you have any favorites? Also, Mike, will you be checking out SRPG Studio when it comes to Steam August 20th? So I have very little, if any, experience with Romhacks. Um, I've played some older games that were modded a little bit, like Final Fantasy VII. I've played with some like graphics mods. Generally speaking, I don't necessarily I'm not motivated to play a game and then like get like a different experience out of it, or play it in a different way generally, as much as like when I'm replaying a game, I'm more trying to remember what it was like when I played it before. I'm trying to re-experience the same thing rather than like play it in a different way. That's just kind of my personal preference with replaying games. That being said, there does come a time where you have played a game so many times that it has almost nothing left to offer you, right? With Ocarina of Time, that's kind of where I'm at. So I liked the fact that like Master's Quest was released, where it did change the layouts of some of the dungeons. It did make it more difficult because it was like, ooh, it's the same game, it's the same mechanics, it's more or less, the same everything, except like there's differences here that get my brain a little more engaged. So like I loved Master's Quest for that reason, because I had already beaten Ocarina of Time when Master's Quest came out, probably like 10, 15 times. So I mean, at the time it was my favorite game ever, and I just could not stop playing it. I just adored it. But I got to the point where I had like freaking memorized the game beginning to end, and it really had nothing left to offer me anymore. Every time I sit down to play it now, it's like my brain is not really engaged in what's happening. It's just muscle memory. So it's nice, I think, when you've played a game that many times to have an experience that sort of like mixes it up for you. I've played Final Fantasy VII, I think, enough times at this point to where I'm ready to try something like that. I think the next time I play Final Fantasy VII, if it isn't the remake, if I'm just playing the OG game, I will probably download the mod that increases the difficulty. I'll probably download the mod that changes the translation and fixes some of the translation, gives a more accurate translation. So I think that for Final Fantasy VII, I'll probably try that the next time I play it. But outside of those games, I don't think I've replayed any game enough times to feel like I need a different experience from this. Because I don't have like this really strong memory that a lot of you guys in the community have. Like I'll be playing a game, doing a stream, something like that, and people are coming in and being like, "Ooh, you missed this. Ooh, turn right here and go down this tunnel and get this." And it's like, "Oh man, like you guys really know these games deeply. You have them like memorized, essentially." And like for longer JRPGs, like the ones we talk about on the channel, it's really hard for me to remember all those details. So I can go back and play Chrono Trigger for the fifth time and still forget things, and still forget even strategies that I had employed in previous playthroughs or whatever. I don't remember like everything super clearly. So for me, even if I'm replaying a game, like I said, for a second, third, fourth, fifth time, I'm still challenged to some degree because I don't remember everything. I don't even remember like most things. So it's a fresh enough experience still to me that like I still get a lot out of just the original game as it is. Um, Dark Souls. Dark Souls I've played I think enough times to where like because they kind of did that with Dark Souls 2, right? Like Dark Souls 2 launched and then they had the what is it called? The something sin version? Hold on, I got to pull this up on Steam so I can freaking remember what it's called. Um Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin. Right, so you have Dark Souls 2, the vanilla version, and you have Scholar of the First Sin, which is kind of like Master's Quest, if I'm not mistaken. Like, they switched around, like, placement of enemies and things like that, and they sort of, like, changed the game in a significant way so that it's kind of a different experience from the original. So, like, now I've only played Dark Souls 2 once, so I don't know. I probably, if I do replay it, I'll probably play Scholar of the First Sin first. But for the original Dark Souls, which I've beaten probably on the cusp of 5 or 6 times, that's a game that I think like I could probably get into some kind of modded version that increases the difficulty and changes things up a bit. Like that could be fun because Dark Souls it's a game that I have not memorized everything, but enough of my strategy, my way of playing it, I have memorized to where I kind of get into the same rut of doing the same thing every time. So it'd be nice to play a version of that game. I think that it changes things up a bit. So, um, Adrisa's Pieces says, "You mean you don't remember all of Gao's 255 rages?" I do not. Do not. Do not have them memorized. So, anyways, good question. Thank you for that, Xylon. Moving on here to Jakob Bean. I loved this question. What's your thought on a Bill and Ted RPG? It could be the next Chrono Trigger. What movie would you like to see made into a game? You know, Jakob, I probably don't have a ton of insight on this question, but you have nailed it on the head. Of all movies I have seen that would work as a JRPG, Bill and Ted is one that would be just phenomenal for that. It would work. It would work perfectly as like a tongue-in-cheek JRPG, like a kind of like a 16-bit indie style tongue-in-cheek RPG. Bill and Ted would be freaking perfect for that. I think that you have now opened my eyes to how perfect that would be. And that is indeed the movie franchise that I want to see made into a game. So you have your what's the word? You've proselyted and you have convinced me. You have converted me to the Bill and Ted RPG team. I'm on that team now. I want to see that happen. So yes, I would love that. I would love that. I would love to see that. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Someone here brought up Nausicaa as a game. That would be cool. I think that world is a fascinating world and could serve as, I guess, a setting for a really good game to take place in. I haven't seen the movie in a while, but from what I remember of it, I don't know if that particular story would fit a game perfectly, but I think the world of Nausicaa could serve as a really cool setting for it. Yes, be excellent to each other and party on, dudes. Okay, let's move on to. Actually, Master of Your Domain said Men in Black as an RPG. That could also work. I think that's a movie that could work as an RPG. There's a lot of stories you could tell in that setting, right? You don't necessarily have to take the exact story of Men in Black, the movie, but again, setting a game within that universe, there's so many possibilities there. So that could work. That could really work. Okay, let's move on to Hat89 here. Jacobine, thank you for the donation. Says Napoleon can cast mini. Oh, dude, you're the freaking best. That is hilarious. I love that. I love that. Let's make it happen, man. You and me. We'll make a Bill and Ted's game. We'll release it on Steam and the Switch. Okay, let's actually move on to Hat 89's question now. Thank you for the super chat, Jacobine. I appreciate that. Okay, Hat 89 asks, quite a few people I've seen have stated they would like Final Fantasy XVI to be based on the Agni's Philosophy trailer that was released several years ago. Do you agree with this sentiment, or would this be a good move? Personally, I don't want Square to base an entire game around a trailer yet again, but it was a cool trailer. Hashtag off topic. Hashtag Jean-Luc Picard is back. Let's talk about that first. That's the far more interesting thing here. Jean-Luc Picard is back. If you guys were not aware, Patrick Stewart has announced that he is returning. He's reprising his role as Jean-Luc Picard in another Star Trek series that they are currently working on. They don't have any scripts or anything like that, but they have got him committed to come back and reprise his role as Picard 20-ish years after the events of The Next Generation. And that is very exciting news. I can't wait to see where they go with that. Now, the danger with anything like this, where you're trying to revive something that was beloved and that's old, is that you will not be faithful to the spirit of something, right? And fans are going to be disappointed, and they're going to have expectations. So he tried to like soften some of that. He tried to say something like, it's possible that he may not be a captain anymore. Again, there's no script, so there's nothing set in stone. It's possible that he won't be the character that you remember. It's been 20 years. His experiences have changed him. He was trying to sort of prepare people for the fact that this might not be the same Picard you remembered. It might not feel the same as you remembered. But it is still exciting nonetheless that we'll be getting more Star Trek in the era of the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. Ever since Voyager went off the air, they've been going backwards in Star Trek. They go back to Enterprise, which is like before the foundation of the Federation. Then, with Discovery right now, they're just a little bit before the time of the original series. They're bringing Captain Pike back for season 2. It's like, guys, stop going back. Let's go forward. Let's go forward in the future. So it's nice that we'll finally get a freaking Star Trek show that happens after the period of the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager, even if it's only a little bit after. So, anyways. Now, to the center of the question here. Do I want Final Fantasy 16 to be based on Agni's philosophy? That would be cool. I mean, it looked like an interesting world. Personally, I'd like to see something more, not necessarily Ivalice. They don't have to make a game in Ivalice, though I would not be opposed to that. But I'd like to see something that's a little bit more based in sort of traditional fantasy for the next Final Fantasy game. It's been, it's been a little while since we've seen that from a mainline Final Fantasy game. If you're not counting the MMO, right? So like 15 was in sort of like a modernish kind of world. Final Fantasy 13 was in sort of like a futuristic kind of setting. It hasn't been since Final Fantasy 12, which launched in 2006, that we've had a more traditional mainline fantasy Final Fantasy game. So I'd like to see that personally, but I would not be opposed in any way to them sticking with the Agni's philosophy, which I couldn't really tell. It's been a while since I've seen that. It seemed to have. It didn't seem to be like knights and sorcery kind of fantasy, but it also doesn't appear to be any kind of like modern thing. Did they have guns? Did they have guns in the Agni's philosophy trailer? That's the question. Will it have guns or bows and arrows, right? Either way, whether it falls one way or the other, Agni's philosophy did look interesting, and I would not be opposed if they developed that concept into a full game for Final Fantasy 16. As long as the storytelling is good, I'm really on board with anything. But I would think personally, just for myself, that I'd like to see something in more of a traditional fantasy setting again. So, I don't know. That's just where I sit on that. Thank you for the question, Hat. Next question comes from Arnicles. Arnicles asks, well, first of all, he says, hey guys, just became a patron, loving your videos. Thank you. Thank you for your patronage. Thank you for your support of the channel. Really, really appreciate it. He says, they make me look forward to my long commutes to work or university. Good. We're glad that our podcast can help people pass time, whether that's on commutes, whether that's at work, doing boring tasks, or whether that's grinding in a video game, whatever it may be. We're glad that we can help out with that. What are some of your favorite aesthetic or art styles in video games? I don't mean just the raw quality of the graphics and how beautiful they look, but more so about how the style fits in with the themes or setting of the game. For example, many people agree that the original Final Fantasy VII's graphics have aged terribly, and I agree 100%, but personally, I feel that the style of the art really fits in with the theme of the game, being that it's set in a world overrun by greed and pollution. The more dull colors and dark areas specifically. Another example is Wind Waker, the original, released way back in 2002, that still holds up to this day because of the bright, colorful, cel-shaded style that corresponds perfectly with the charming adventure game. So I don't know if you guys have played um, Hyper Light Drifter, but that's a game that I fell in love with. I really, 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 really like that game. The art style in it in particular is amazing. It's not just that it's pixel art style, which I mean, I pixel art just gets me right here. I love pixel art. But beyond that, I think it's like the character design, the design of the world. I remember there was a point. There's two specific shots I see in my head that just like the composition of it blew me away. One of them is kind of in the intro. It shows the character sort of standing. There's like some stairs leading up to kind of a pillar the character's standing on. The background behind that he's looking out to is dark, and he's standing there with sword drawn, and then there's like a flash of light, and you see like the faces of these giant things out there, and it's like he's facing off against these huge giants in the distance, and just like the way they use parallax there, the way it's composed, the style, lots of uses of pink, uses a lot of like pink and purple as like I guess like what do you call that, primary colors in the game. Just really, really beautiful style to it. There's another one where you're kind of climbing the area in the north of the map. You're kind of climbing up a mountain, then you sort of see out in the distance like one of those giants, like still presumably dead or whatever, but like dead as it like clings onto the side of a mountain. And I just remember looking at that for like a couple of minutes, just standing there, like jaw dropped, just like, dude, that looks so amazing. Holy crap. So I really love the art style in Hyper Light Drifter. It's one of my favorites that I've ever seen in any game. Really, really stuck out to me. A lot of people, when they talk about Zelda, they go to Wind Waker, right? I think there's a good reason for that. Wind Waker is very memorable. It really stands out because the art style is so different, really, from like anything else in the series, and really anything else I've ever seen. I've never seen any other game with an art style like Wind Waker's. It's very distinct, very unique, and it just really stands out. So I really like Wind Waker's art style a lot. It's really, really great. But I actually really love the art style of Twilight Princess as well. And while Twilight Princess isn't my favorite Zelda game, I think in terms of like its concept art and its art direction, it is my favorite of all the Zeldas. I just really love the design of everything in Wind Waker. Or not Wind Waker, of Twilight Princess. I love the concept of the mirror that you can kind of pass through to the Twilight realm. I love like the sort of like Tron-y sort of like line work that they have in the Twilight realm. And so I really like the design of Link himself in that one too. I think it's really, really strong. So Twilight Princess, I think, has a very, very strong art design. Midna, I think, as a character, really stands out to me too. Like Midna's just like character design, I think, is really strong, really excellent. Um, you know, I used to hate Final Fantasy IX's art direction. I looked at it, I was just like, that's just whack. It was especially in the faces of the character. There's something about it just like really like what the frick? That's like, yeah, that like scares me to look at it. But like over time, it's really started to grow on me in a similar way that Wind Waker's has. Just how distinct it is, how like unlike anything else it is. And I especially like the design for like airships, cities, like architecture, monster design, those sorts of things. I've grown more and more to like the character design for the main cast as well, but more so like when you fly into like Lindblum, for example, in that cutscene, that FMV cutscene. Um, and just like the way that the city is sort of like layered in the background on all of the pre-rendered backgrounds and stuff. It's great. It's just really, really imaginative. There's tons of detail in it. Vivi, the character design for Vivi, I think is one of the strongest in the entire series. Um, I just really like it. I just like how lively it is and how many kinds of characters there are and different races and things like that. It's really lively and fun, and I've grown to really like Final Fantasy IX's aesthetic, while originally I dismissed it big time due to the aesthetic. It was like, oh, that looks stupid. I don't want to play that. But playing it a few times over the years, I've really, really come to like it a lot. So those are a few. It's another game where the art style really like stood out. I can tell you what series I'm not a fan of art wise is Tales of. I do not like the character designs and the anime style that is found in the Tales of series. I really, really strongly dislike it. It's much too samey to other things. It's the anime style that has totally taken over JRPGs. Freaking can't stand it. Anyways, that's probably good enough for now. Thank you for the question, Articles. Good question. Freya, yes. Eva Woolridge brings up Freya's design is amazing. I really like Freya's design. Like the Red Mage design, the way they worked Red Mage into Freya, the way they worked Black Mage into Vivi, just stellar. Really well done. Okay, with Capcom as of late in recent interviews going out of their way to please the consumer by returning franchises to their roots or putting franchises back where they were. Examples being Monster Hunter World, Mega Man 11, Devil May Cry 5, and Resident Evil 7, also Resident Evil 2 remake. They have also said they care more about reception than sales numbers. It does seem like Capcom is really pushing to put themselves back in a positive light after how the last few years they were being heavily criticized. What do you think about Capcom's shift and new focus on openly expressing customer first? Do you think it is possible that they could go overboard on giving fans what they want and not exploring new things? Too much of a good thing type of scenario. Here are some articles for reference. Okay, this is questions from Velhart. So he gave me a couple articles. Let's transition over to them. Look at these. So Devil May Cry 5 was born because the fans wanted it. Capcom aims to appease fans within reason. Some quotes here. The last game was very good, but there were a few unhappy voices because it wasn't a direct sequel and other things. Because of that, the dev team sat down and asked, where do we want to take that next? And it was known that the community wanted Devil May Cry 5 to be closer to 1, 2, and 3, and so this project was born, or the project was born. We can debate whether that genre has the same appeal it used to, meaning the hack and slash genre. That's hard to say. The project was born because of what the fans want. It's fair to say that we're very focused on the audience and the feedback that we get. We have seen some horrible stories in the media recently about publishers bending to the will of the internet. We wouldn't advocate going that far, but certainly there is an element of fan service that runs throughout the company. DMC is an example of that. Fans weren't happy, so therefore we went a different way. It's part of giving back within the remit that we're still a business. We still need it to sell. We want to give things to the fans. We want to support them, but it has to make sense. So we do it within reason. We don't listen to the far extremes of the fan base, shall we say. This project would never have been greenlit if it didn't make sense business-wise. We rarely have crazy forecasts on any of our games. DMC5 will please a fan base that is still quite big. Okay, this other article here about Resident Evil 2. They're surprised by the strong pre-orders for Resident Evil 2. We had discussions on whether we could make a game that was everything for everyone. For those guys who want tank controls and want fixed cameras, can we do that? This is a really good example. People who want Resident Evil to play like Resident Evil 1 and 2 versus people who want Resident Resident Evil 2, but to play like say Resident Evil 4 or something like that. But the world has moved on, and those players have changed. And if we did introduce the old school mechanics, these fans might play it and actually decide it's not what they wanted after all. But we played around with a few things in development. We did try first person, we did try fixed camera, but the way the game has been designed, we decided that a third person view works better. That being said, Capcom certainly not concerned about whether the change will be received well by fans. That was probably the main worry or question mark that we had. We knew there were expectations around the game. We knew it would look great. We knew it looked great and would be a good game. But around the point of tank controls and fixed cameras, we were worried that the fan base would be divided. But although there might have been some initial dissenting voices, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. You know, I think this is a really great example. And I think that sort of fits into where, like, my opinion would lie on it. Like, Resident Evil 1 and 2 had those fixed camera angles and those tank controls, right? And it would not make a lot of sense, business-wise, to design a game like that in the modern age. I think that kids who are growing up today, you know, teenagers and stuff like that, who didn't play games with tank controls back in the day, wouldn't accept tank controls on a wide scale in this day and age. So at that point, you are only pandering to the handful of fans that you had back on the PlayStation 1 who are still with you today, right? Think of all the people who bought and played Resident Evil back in the day. And how many of those people are still hardcore gamers today? I mean, there's certainly some. I'm not arguing that, but I'm sure a lot of people who played games on the PS1 when they were in high school, when they were teenagers, they don't play games anymore. They've moved on with life, whatever it is. There are a lot of people like that. I know people like that, right? Who were big gamers when they were young and they don't play games anymore. You know, Tyler White earlier was saying he doesn't enjoy playing games like he used to. He'd rather kind of keep up on the industry and follow other people talking about it, but he doesn't necessarily enjoy playing himself, doesn't necessarily have time to play it himself. So it would make no sense business-wise to design a remake of Resident Evil 2 with tank controls. Now, does this also mean that the Final Fantasy VII remake, you know, that they're kind of taking the same direction? They're trying to design a more modern game with more mass appeal because they're not banking on the fact that all their fans from 1997 will have stuck around to enjoy this one. I think that's a little bit different. Final Fantasy VII sold like over 10 million copies. I don't know how many Resident Evil 2 sold, but not close to that many. So I think that playing it safe with Resident Evil 2 and making some alterations to how the game plays is a much smarter move, because there's just not nearly going to be the same carryover over the 20 years as Final Fantasy VII would have had. And I also don't think that turn-based gameplay is really a good comparison to tank controls, right? Like, tank controls were divisive even at the time. Turn-based RPGs are proving with games like Octopath Traveler to have a large fan base. With games like Persona 5, like, obviously there's a big group of people who are completely okay with turn-based combat. So in Final Fantasy VII's case, I think that they probably could have done more to please the fans who want turn-based combat, but I'm completely okay with Resident Evil 2 abandoning tank controls and fixed camera. So I think that Capcom, their head's in the right place. They're wanting to please fans. They're seeking the opinions of fans, but they're trying to ignore anyone who's on the fringe there, whose opinions are on the fringe, who the opinions are extreme. It's just like, forget those people. We've got to look at this from a business perspective, right? And realize that, like, tank controls and fixed camera are not going to work in a game released today. And so, we have had massive success with the series with games like Resident Evil 4. So we can take more of a modern control approach like Resident Evil 4 had, but just bring Resident Evil 2 back. I think that's very sensible. Someone here said that Resident Evil 2 sold something like 5 million copies, which is a lot. It's a lot. But like 10 million is a lot more. So anyways, it's I think that they're on the right track. Devil May Cry, you know, deciding that they want to kind of like take it more into its roots, the hack and slash roots, right, with this next game. I think also as long as they don't spend too much, like as long as they can keep development costs reasonable, they have some room to experiment with something like Devil May Cry. They can take the risk of trying an older style of combat there, something more like Devil May Cry 1, 2, and 3, as long as the development costs don't like just soar out of the stratosphere like a AAA, budget. I think that they could make something like that and scale back a bit, and still make something really fun, without breaking the bank to make a Devil May Cry game, and they could determine from that, okay, how many people are there really who want a game in this style in this day and age. So I like their mindset. I think they're being very sensible, and I think it's very important for companies to think of customer first, think of their fans, and try to please their fans instead of just thinking only about the biggest sales figures they can possibly get, pushing as many units as possible. There's room for that kind of game. There's always going to be the mass appeal. This game sold 15, 20 million copies kind of game. That's just a complete, like, just a hit around the world, global hit. Your Fortnites, your Call of Duties, your League of Legends. But it's not reasonable to assume that games in genres like Devil May Cry, Resident Evil, even to some extent, to a large extent, JRPGs are kind of like a middle-sized market. They're not big market stuff. So you shouldn't have the ambition to create something at the scale and at the budget size of something like those major, huge, gigantic hits. You should probably be thinking more along the lines of middle market budget, and just try to make something really good in there and just please those people. There's enough people in there to sustain you as a company. Maybe you're not going to be Activision, maybe you're not going to be EA in terms of size, you're not going to be Ubisoft, but you don't have to be to sustain a company, to make good money. You can have smaller teams, smaller budgets, smaller studios, and be self-sustaining. It's perfectly possible. So I think if Capcom shoots for that, they can find a lot of success there. So I like it. I like what they're saying. Sounds good to me. Okay, we've got ReyIvory here for the final question. Actually, he had two, and they kind of go together, and they kind of go along with what I was just saying. So he says, when should a company stop focusing on new audiences? This is a question that isn't limited to gaming, because I feel all Western entertainment has this problem to some degree. Lately, I've seen a few games make some controversial decisions in order to appeal to new fans. One example is with Pokemon. They have made the games with numerous diverse changes in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee in order to appeal to more casual fans or the Pokemon Go community. These changes include things like taking away battling of wild Pokemon, simplifying the catching mechanic, gyms requiring to enter them with the Pokemon strong against that gym, etc. However, Pokemon is a series that routinely sells around 16 million copies for the first games of each new generation. Other franchises are guilty of this as well, though, including Final Fantasy and Star Wars, the American comic book industry in its entirety. What do you feel that companies need to hold back on getting this new audience? this kind of goes along, speaking of Star Wars, I think in particular, with the Capcom discussion. At what point do you look... At what point are you satisfied with the size of the market that you're going after, right? At what point do you say, like, this is enough people? There are enough people in this market, let's go after them, instead of saying, nope, we need people from this market and this market and this market. We need this gigantic, huge market of all people on the planet. Everyone's our market, right? That's dangerous territory, because a lot of people are going to be displeased with what you make if you do that, instead of focusing specifically on a targeted demographic. So with Pokemon in particular, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a Pokemon fan, but it seems to me like Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee is not like a mainline series Pokemon game. It seems to me as sort of a branch or an offshoot game that is probably meant for more of the Pokemon Go crowd to try and get them to come buy Switches. But I think they're still developing another Pokemon game internally, right? That's more like the regular series Pokemon games, because they have nothing to worry about there. They don't need to change much. They've already found their massive success. They just kind of stick with that. And I think that they are making one along those lines still. It just hasn't been announced yet. I just think that Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, which is, I mean, the title itself, I think, is a little bit of a sell that they're not necessarily making a traditional Pokemon game. So yeah, I think it is really, really important to know exactly who you're going after, and for that to be very specific. In marketing, I remember I went to a YouTube conference, a convention that they had here. It was an invite-only convention that they had here in Salt Lake City. And they had an exercise, because they were sort of rolling out some of their new policies for their new algorithm. They were educating us on the algorithm and how it works, what you should or should not do, how long your video should be. They were talking a lot about watch time, how that was becoming something really important for their algorithm. But they had a little exercise where they sat down and they said they wanted people to come up with their target demographic, but they weren't thinking of it as a demographic, as a range of people. They were saying, who is the specific person that you are trying to reach? They wanted to get so specific that you're talking about basically a single person. So it was like, well, this guy is 32 years old. He grew up, he's male, grew up with, JRPGs in the 90s, loved Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy. We had to like really get specific about the person so we could imagine the person. And it's like, that's the guy that we're trying to reach with our content, right? That is in marketing really important to do. And the broader you get with that, where it's like, nope, we're getting greedy here. We want more than just that person. We want everyone on the planet. We want all people to love this. It's really going to start having implications, like heavy consequences on the work that you create, because you'll be trying to appease people who don't like the same things. They're not part of the same demographic. They're all over the spectrum. And this person isn't going to like this thing that you're trying to put into it to appease this guy over here. And then this person over here won't be into that. So you're trying to appease so many types of people, from so many different walks of life, from so many different tastes, that essentially what ends up happening is no one's pleased. Everyone's upset, and no one's satisfied. And I think you can get way too greedy in the pursuit of mass appeal, that you start to really lose the nuance and the niche that makes your work really special. And it becomes just bland and sterile and doesn't have any heart to it. And it's very much like a formulated thing We were sticking this in here to hit those people. We're sticking this in here to hit those people. And there's no like genuine or sincere flow to the work. And it can really, really hurt the artistic aspect. So I think it's really important that you become very specific about who your audience is and you just try to reach out to those people rather than constantly seeking to broaden the audience and grow the audience, make it huge and more huge. And this is the case with almost everything. Eventually, the fatigue sets in. The fan base grows so massive that no one's really satisfied. When's the last time a Call of Duty game came out and everyone was like so excited about it? I mean, people are buying it, but are people happy with Call of Duty? When's the last time anyone talked about Call of Duty in a positive light? I can't even think of it. All I ever hear about is how awful it is now, how bad it is now. And that's because as it grew and millions and millions and millions of people are playing it, there's just that many more people from all different walks of life, like I'm saying, who are going to find things in it they don't like. It's not made for them specifically. It's not made for their niche. It's made to try and appeal a little bit to a bunch of different niches. And eventually people get sick of it and they start writing it off and it fails in popularity. So yeah, there's a fine line to walk there. If you're looking for mass appeal, which Star Wars always has been. Star Wars launched at mass appeal the way that it was. So this attempt by Disney now, with what they're doing in the process of creating these, to reach out to more is totally unnecessary. Everyone already freaking loved it, So there is definitely, there's definitely greed that gets involved. It's never enough. It doesn't matter if you sell 15 million units. It's like, well, we've got investors here we have to please, and we have to keep growing year over year as a company. So we have to continue to expand and reach out and get more people in here, reach another demographic. And that goes up for a time, and then eventually it starts to slope, and then people start really not liking it, and then everyone bails. So it's a slow process for some things. But I mean, you see it happen. You're seeing it happening with Star Wars, with the box office failure, which I mean, it wasn't really like a failure, but of the Solo film that just came out, right? Like it did not reach, it lost money. People are getting tired of Star Wars. Call of Duty still selling really well, but it's not talked about in a very positive light for years now. League of Legends, I know, is like a very toxic community in terms of like the I don't know, just the attitude of people, when they talk about it. Final Fantasy is becoming that way. Final Fantasy is like, people are freaking mad about Final Fantasy, about Square Enix as a company in general. And that I think comes directly from a company having a hit movie, a hit game, whatever it is. They have a hit on their hands. And it's like, we're going to continue to expand that as far as it'll go. Instead of saying, we hit our demographic. We found them. We found them, guys. We got 10 million people that fit our niche. That's a lot. That's a big niche. Let's focus on that 10 million people instead of saying, nope, we've got to exceed that. We've got to go beyond. And I think that at some point that really, really starts to hurt you. It happens every time. And eventually that thing falls away. Okay. The second part of ReyIvory's question was... well, actually, it was the first part of it, but I picked the second one. Do you think developers and games in general should pull back on progressing for a short period of time? Every year I see games trying to push the envelope with bigger worlds, more detailed textures and characters, and higher quality graphics. However, do you think that maybe games should stop and explore what they can actually do with the tech they already have now? Absolutely. Absolutely. He brings up the Majora's Mask as a point here. I absolutely feel that way. There's so much time and energy put into creating a new engine, creating new assets, trying to make the game work, trying to work through the bugs. Like that part of the development process is so time intensive and so much work. I mean, imagine if we could actually like get something set like they did with Ocarina of Time, and you just like basically reuse what you had. Now, for the sake of consistency, right, I want to point out the fact that I've criticized Final Fantasy X-2 for this very thing. I think the idea behind Final Fantasy II is a good one. Reuse assets. You know, you spent all of this time and energy building this thing. Let's like maximize profits we can make from this. But what I would have rather seen, I would have rather seen that they make a new Final Fantasy game with the same engine, with the same, you know, similar assets with like light touch up or light changes to it. A new Final Fantasy, not Final Fantasy X-2, which is against the philosophy of Final Fantasy. Sakaguchi didn't like the idea of sequels. He never has, which is why every Final Fantasy game is different. So they broke the spirit of the franchise for the sake of making a sequel to bank on the success of Final Fantasy X. What I would have rather seen is that they just took all the research and development, all the work on the assets, and they put that to work into a new product. Majora's Mask is what that is, because it's not. It is a sequel in some ways to Ocarina of Time. It's the same character, but it's so wildly different from Ocarina of Time. It might as well be just a totally new thing. They don't, you know, reuse Ganondorf. They're not even in the same land of Hyrule anymore. There's just so much experimentation, so much creativity, so much that's new in Majora's Mask that separates it from Ocarina of Time. That's more along the lines of what I'd like to see. I think with all the time and energy they put into Breath of the Wild, you know, they pulled the Monolith Soft, the team behind the Xenoblade games, they pulled them in to help them figure out like physics and like how to build an open world. They spent so much time getting Breath of the Wild to work that it would be really nice if they could just take all of that legwork, all the stuff that they've already accomplished, just reuse that stuff and make a new game. And you know, maybe then you'll have some more time and energy to focus on storytelling and improve that side of things. So yeah, I really, really like the idea of that. I think that sometimes with game development, people can get really caught up in the tech side of it and in advancing the tech. And it's like, that's great. I mean, it's awesome that graphics are improving, worlds are getting bigger, physics are becoming more lifelike, facial animation, performance, like all that stuff is great. But at the core of it, you know, your gameplay and your storytelling, like that's what really like gets people to stay long term versus like how advanced the tech is, right? That's why you find these indie games that are basically calling back to like 16-bit style graphics that just like, you know, like Shovel Knight, you know, these huge hits. Because like the tech is not as important as the actual interaction and as the actual storytelling. Like that's what's really going to hook people into an experience. And so when that comes first and the tech comes after, I think generally the games turn out better for it. So I'm completely on board for companies, you know, slowing down a little bit on the priority of tech, advance the tech, advance the tech, advance the tech, and really focus on those other things first. And you can make games faster that way too. So instead of games taking like 5-6 years to complete, you can take 5 or 6 years to develop a game for an engine for the next console generation. And then you can turn another game around in a year, 2 years, you know, really quick. You can get 2 games out of that 5 or 6 years of research and development. And then after you get your 2 games out of it, you kind of move on to your next 5-year cycle of research and development. And then you get 2 games out of that, you know. I think that is what I would do if I were prioritizing a video game. Anyways, those are my thoughts on that. And I've also reached the end of my topics for the day. Thank you, ReyIvory, and everyone else who suggested topics for today. Appreciate you guys. And thank you guys who were here live watching. You guys are beasts. I appreciate you watching. Appreciate your support of the channel. We have big things coming. Really big things coming. They're moving along. Hoping that by the end of August, everything will be ready to roll out. So, yeah. You guys have a great week. And I'll see you again really soon. Peace out.